this first series of lectures, we'll talk about the water cycle and the different processes within the water cycle. So the first topic of this series is about how much usable water there is on Earth, and there's a lot of misconceptions about how much water there really is available for use. So that'll be our focus for this mini lecture. So often people think of Earth as the water planet, and while it is a planet with water on it, we don't have quite as much water as people seem to think often. So this is a nice graphic that was obtained from the USGS, or the US Geological Survey. And so it shows that if you could take all of the water that's on Earth and make a little sphere out of just the water part of Earth, it would make a sphere that's the size of this ball on the graphic. And so you can see this ball barely covers up the sphere, barely covers up the western United States. And actually, if you moved it over, it really doesn't even cover all of the western United States. So the amount of water that's on Earth is really relatively small compared to the volume of the Earth overall. So really, you can think of water as a thin blanket that covers the surface of much of the Earth. When we talk about the distribution of water on Earth, I like this graphic because it helps you to kind of break down the different places where we find water. So 96.5% of all of the water on Earth is found in our oceans. So this is a vast majority of all water on Earth. It's in the oceans, and it's salty. And so you can't really use this water for consumption because of the salt in the water. And then another 1% of water is salty groundwater, or saline groundwater, and salty lakes. So again, those are not really fit for consumption. That only leaves 2.5% of all of Earth's water as fresh water. So fresh water we can consume, it doesn't have salt in it. However, if we look at all of the fresh water in this middle column, we see that of that 2.5% of Earth's water that is fresh, a majority of that, so about about 2/3 of that is in glaciers and ice caps. And so again, that is not really accessible water for us. We can't consume that water because it's in the polar regions or way up high on mountains, and it's frozen and we can't access it. Almost 1/3 of all fresh water is groundwater, and some of this we can access, and some of this is too deep to be able to access. But this is a good source of water for us, groundwater. And then of the 2.5% of Earth's water that is fresh, only 1.3% of that is surface water or other freshwater sources. Okay, so let's move to that third column, which is all surface water and other fresh water, and look at how that breaks down. So of this, about a little more than 2/3, almost 3/4 of all surface water is in ice and snow. And this ice and snow is different from glaciers and ice caps. This ice and snow is temporary ice and snow that exists on surfaces and can melt. So it's seasonal. 20% of all surface water are lakes, and then all of the rest of fresh water are these really small percentages. So rivers are 0.5% of the surface water. Swamps and marshes are 2.5% of all surface water. Soil moisture, so this is not groundwater, but water that we find just existing near the surface of soil, 3.5% of all surface water. And then atmospheric water, that's the water that's up in our atmosphere in the clouds, that's only 0.22%. This water is short-lived. It's only in the atmosphere for a short amount of time before it comes back to Earth's surface and either becomes part of the oceans or surface water or recharges aquifers or glaciers. So of this water that we just looked at, which parts of it are usable for humans? And so it's really easier to talk about what kind of water is not usable. All of the water that's frozen in glaciers is not usable. All of the water that's salty in the oceans is not usable. Water that's contaminated is not usable without a fair amount of treatment, and sometimes even then still too hard to get all of the pollutants out, and so that would include chemical pollutants and also biological I can't talk today, and also biological pollutants, and then also water that's in very deep aquifers, so very deep groundwater that we cannot access, that is also not usable. So that means that if you look at all the water on Earth, 99% of it is unusable, 1% is usable. Of this 1%, most of it exists in the groundwater, and then a very small percentage exists as surface water in the forms of lakes and rivers.